when we published in Jama Kakadu, the Akan origin of High John the Conqueror, the man in the root revealed, we were the first to show that quote-unquote High John the Conqueror was actually an Akwamu Asafo Hini, a warrior king. He was a lieutenant of the Akwamu Hini, the Akwamu king Ansa Kwao at the time. He was captured along with an entourage and forced into enslavement on St. John's Island, which was a few miles away from St. Thomas. This was in 12,733. Those who were enslaved with him on the island understood that he was Asafo Hini, he was a warrior king, warrior chief, second to the Akwamu Hini, the Akwamu king, and therefore they recognized and respected him as such. As we talk about his origins, his name was Nyama, also pronounced Njama, and by some Jama, which is a dialectal variant of Nyama or Njama. So therefore, in the records of the Danes who controlled the Danish West Indies at the time, they said that the individuals on the island called him King Jama. But the Danes wrote his name as Kongye Joni. In their dialect, Kongye Joni meant King John or King Joni. When the English began to write about this period in history, instead of writing Kongye Joni, they wrote King Juni or King Jun. But the natives, his people, called him King Jama. Jama or Njama or Nyama is actually the name of an abosom, the name of a deity. It is also the name of a plant, Inyama, which is a plant totem for that divinity, and anybody connected to that divinity has their plant as their totem. So when King Jama or Asafo Hini Jama was enslaved, but he rose to the position of leader or foreman on the plantation, they looked around and searched out their terrain. They began to assess what was taking place, and they realized that they could strike. After arriving on the island in May of so-called 1733, by November of 1733, they made their move. Asafo Hini Jama, King Jama, organized the people. They waged war against the Danes, and they took over the entire island and held the entire island for over 6 months. They decided this was going to be the western outpost of the Akwamu Empire, and they were going to begin to trade back and forth with their people at home in the region of the Akwamu Empire, which is now Ghana. After a number of months of this Akwamu-led rebellion that was successful and they were in control of the entire island, fissures and fractures occurred within the population of the people that allowed the whites and their offspring to come from outside and put down the rebellion. King Jama and his supporters were ultimately captured, but he decided that he would not be taken alive. Him and his close circle decided they would commit suicide, but prior to that, they told the people, if you ever needed to reach me, simply take this plant, take this root, and you will have the same force and fire to overcome your enemies. Now the root that King Jama pointed to and held up as the sacred root that his spirit would enter into is the root called Kakadu in the Asante dialect and Kakadu in the Akwamu dialect. Once again, the term Undu means medicine. Kaka, Undu, or Kakadu means the medicine that is Kaka. In the Akan language, Kaka means to bite or to chew. Kaka also means to touch or to rub. Kaka also means ferocity, ferociousness, irrepressibility, and so forth. The Kaka, Undu, or the Kakaru is the biting medicine, or the biting Undu, or the biting hoodoo, the chewing hoodoo. It is the chewing root. Kaka meaning to touch or to rub is the rubbing Kaka Undu root, or the rubbing root. Kaka meaning fierceness, ferocity, irrepressibility. When you take that fiery root, you become fierce, irrepressible, ferocious, and so forth. That is the Kaka Undu or the Kakadu, that medicine undu that makes you fierce, powerful, irrepressible, and so forth. That particular root is called ginger in North America. The sacred plant Inyama, the totem for the deity Inyama, who King Inyama or King Njama, King Jama was named after, didn't exist in the Caribbean. So when he got to the Caribbean after being enslaved, when they were living on the plantation, there were certain plants and certain animals that were sacred in the region of the Akwamu Empire where they came from that they recognized, but there were other certain plants and animals and so forth that they had never seen and that were unrecognizable. The sacred Inyama plant, that plant totem connected to the Inyama Abosom, the Inyama deity, didn't exist in the West Indies. But there was a plant, a root, that he saw after landing in St. John's that he was familiar with from back home. It was the Kakadu or Kakaduru root. And that root, that fiery root, that ginger root, was used as a replacement, a substitute for the Inyama plant that he normally would have utilized. So when he says his spirit went into the root, it is the Kakadu root, the Kakaduru root. In the Asante dialect, it's Kaka Nduru. As we said previously, Nduru is the dialectical variant for Ndu in Akwamu, Nduru in Asante. So Kakaru is the Akwamu dialectical variant, Kakaduru is the Asante dialectical variant, and therefore when the whites and their offspring, when they're writing about the history, they're looking at the Danish records, they see Kongye, Joni, yet the Danes themselves said the natives called him King Jama, but the Danes wrote Kongye, Joni. The English would write King June or Juni. So now you have Juni or Joni, Kakaru, the Kaka Undu or Kakaru, Joni Kakaru, that later became Johnny Kakarut, and then the Asante dialectical variant, Kakaduru, Kakaruru, so Joni Kakaruru. So Joni Kakaruru came to be pronounced Johnny Conqueror. That's the Asante dialectical variant, and Johnny Conqueror comes from Jama Kakadu, the Akwamu dialectical variant. So when you look at blues singers like Bo Diddley saying, I went down and got my Johnny Kakadu, he was saying Jama Kakadu. The biting Kaka Undu Hoodoo medicine. The rubbing Kaka Undu medicine. The Kaka, the ferocious, fiery, explosive Undu medicine. And if you hear some say Johnny Conqueror root, that's simply Jama Kakaruru, Kakaduru, or Kakaruru. That is the same title in the Asante dialect. So we talk about Jama, he's an Akwamu ancestor. For those of us who are Akwamu, Akan people in North America, he is a direct blood ancestor. He visits those of us who are Akwamu. He asks for specific offerings at the shrine, inclusive of the Kakaru, which he utilized in the Western Hemisphere, as well as at home in the region of the Akwamu Empire. When people say that Johnny Conqueror or High John the Conqueror may have come from the Congo, may have come from all these different places, they're simply talking about someone that they were unaware of. This is a direct blood ancestor of Akwamu Akan people. There were many people who were killed during the revolt on St. John's, but all of the people were not killed. Some of those people survived. And a few decades later, the people who were living on St. John and St. Thomas, which were just a few miles from each other, and they were going back and forth developing those islands for enslavement and crops and so forth. Some of those people were forced to leave that island, going to other islands and the United States to be enslaved. Some left voluntarily. There's one individual who left voluntarily from that region a few decades after the revolt on St. John, and his name is Okunfo Kwabena, so-called Denmark Visi. He's the one from St. Thomas and St. John Island who purchased his freedom and eventually migrated to and settled in South Carolina. He would organize one of the largest revolts, rebellions during enslavement, organizing over 9,000 people to wage war against the whites and offspring in South Carolina to take down the entire city. Ultimately, his revolt was compromised. People were killed, people were imprisoned, some people committed suicide. Yet that organized revolt of over 9,000 people in that area with the goal of taking over the entire area and also poisoning the water supply, poisoning the food supply, and killing every white individual in the town, that shook the foundation of whites in America, and it still shakes their foundation to this day. He is one of the individuals who left the St. Thomas, St. John complex, migrated to North America, and carried the root with him and the spiritual force and knowledge of the cosmology associated with that root into North America. So Jama Kakadu came to be pronounced Johnny Conqueror and Johnny Conqueror root. This is specifically an Akwamu Akan ancestor. This is specifically Akwamu Akan ancestral religious practice. The notion of the Jalap root being utilized as High John the Conqueror is a recent interpolation into the Hoodoo tradition. It's only within Akan culture that you find the actual root, its proper name, the Kakadu and Kakadu root, the name of the individual Jama, whose name was corrupted into Joni by the whites, and the entire cosmology associated with his spirit entering the root. This is transcarnational transmission of Akan ancestral religion into the Hoodoo tradition in North America.